All right, I'll call upon delegation 23-115, John Klein, who I believe is online. Sir, I'll ask that you state your name for the record, the organization you represent, if any, and where you're calling from. You'll have 5 minutes to address council, after which you'll have the opportunity to answer any questions council may have for you. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay right now?
We can, sir. Please proceed.
Okay, Your Worship, I try to make a little time to appear at council whenever you're poised to do something bad, like increase parking, and to help make it good instead. I'd rather be doing something else, but as Councillor Stevens attempted to do something good by eliminating parking minimums, his effort was twisted by others into something bad. It's time to turn it back to good before Regina loses both opportunity and money. There is no evidence that increasing the amount of built parking spaces makes life better in Regina. Evidence suggests otherwise. Expert urbanists oppose parking minimums. We also have an official community plan that council passed, and it's supposed to direct how we build our city to be more vibrant. Increasing parking minimums violates that plan, and as an earlier delegation mentioned, it also violates the energy and sustainability framework and the transportation master plan. I'm not above violating bad rules to get something good done, but you're stepping out of bounds to give a gift to the auto industry while hurting your tax base. It's a travesty. Cars don't pay taxes. People do. If you increase free space for automobiles while reducing space for people who actually pay property taxes, you're hurting our own city's revenues. I could go on and on about why you should eliminate parking minimums, so I will. No city who has committed to 100% sustainability by 2050 can justify increasing parking for private automobiles. Affordable housing is more difficult to build because you use up land and space for parking that just isn't needed. More parking space hurts Regina Transit too, because routes are longer and people have further to walk through surface parking lots to get to their bus stops. You have a duty to fund Regina Transit, not for making cheap space for people to park cars. You create sprawl by building more parking. This makes utilities cost more. Only last month you were discussing the impending crisis in Ward 4 from low water pressure. That's directly attributable to faulty council decisions to allow sprawl in the southeast of Regina. It was known during Design Regina 10 years ago that the formation of the official community plan, that building more on that side of the city would incur higher utility costs. Workshops had just ordinary people working at them figured that stuff out. People who vote in favor of parking minimums are in favor of higher taxes and more expensive utilities. There's no way to pretend otherwise. Absent constructive reasons to favor more parking added to new construction, people are left to wonder if councillors in favor of giving free parking spaces to the auto industry are motivated by having mixed loyalties from their other professional careers in the automotive sector. This could lead people to conclude that a conflict of interest is driving their vote and not dutiful consideration to the OCP and experts who can demonstrate that parking minimums are old-fashioned and just plain old bad. I'm not an urban design professional, but I've listened to enough who are, that I too can explain why parking minimums are bad. And you'll do bad things to Regina if you increase it, rather than just eliminate it. I hope I've explained it well enough that you don't need to ask a question about why you must eliminate parking minimums. That's all.
Thank you very much. Mr. Klein? I don't see any questions from council, so thank you very much for presenting this afternoon to us, and ask that you please leave the meeting. All right, I'll call upon Delegation 116, Sophia Young and Daniel Liebman. I'll ask that you please state your name. Please state your name for the records, the organization you represent, if any, and where you reside. You'll have 5 minutes to address council, after which you'll have the opportunity to answer any questions they may have for you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Sophia Young.
And I am Daniel Liebman.
We are the leaders of Better Bus Youth, a 50-person youth grassroots organization that seeks to create a more accessible Regina so every child can succeed. Since urban sprawl correlates to increased energy use, pollution, and traffic congestion, we appreciate Part C of the amendment to the Regina zoning bylaw you are discussing, since it lessens the negative impact on Regina's community of well-being. However, the parking minimum should not increase in suburban areas, since it would decrease accessibility, hurt residents, and contradict the city's goal of a renewable Regina.
As a member of the Alaritri neighborhood, my family is lucky to live in a space where I can use public and active transportation easily to access much of the city. I fear that denser neighborhoods such as mine would no longer be built, as increased parking spaces would encourage our car-centered culture and lead to less walkable communities with limited public transportation access. According to the newspaper Strong Towns, quote, not only are parking spaces unattractive, but parking spaces also create greater distances between the homes and businesses in our communities. What could be a simple walk between the grocery store and home is now a multi-mile drive. And parking minimums are one of the main culprits, end quote.
As a result, we should not increase parking minimums because they hinder small business owners, taxpayers, developers, and renters. These increased parking minimums would force developers to spend more money and space on concrete parkades, taking away valuable living space and increasing costs for renters and home buyers, who must often take on the cost of more parking spaces. Moreover, parking minimums drain cities' economies by creating less taxable properties while encouraging more spending on road infrastructure through car dependency. Joff McCarthy, a consultant at Urban 3, who specializes in the tax value of parking, states, quote, parking dilutes the tax productivity of development. Municipalities for whom property taxes are lifeblood should treat parking for what it is, dead weight and a burden on the taxpayer, end quote.
This results in urban neighborhoods, like mine, subsidizing the cost of suburban sprawl through our taxes. Further, families such as mine, already in a delicate financial situation, may have to pay more for the increasing deficit of suburban sprawl due to the increased parking requirements. We could better redirect those community funds to create better transit, maintain sidewalks, or add bike lanes.
Finally, not increasing the parking minimum is a matter of accountability. By supporting a car-dependent culture, this motion works directly against the energy and sustainability framework and the Regina Transit Master Plan. Thus, increasing parking minimums encourages more traffic, carbon emissions, and heat sinks. Plus, increasing parking minimums dampen plans for mobility options like bike lanes or public transportation and creates safety hazards for people on foot.
For all the above reasons, we ask you not to increase the parking minimum since it is a step backwards in accessibility, community, prosperity, and sustainability. Not increasing parking minimums would prevent increased traffic and promote businesses and developers by giving developers flexibility. Also, it would help Regina create more housing for those who need it, housing that the city can tax, and then invest in more meaningful ventures, like better public transportation. Other cities, such as Edmonton, are limiting parking minimums. We, alongside other youth, want to see you do the same. We look forward to you not increasing parking minimums. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Young and Mr. Liebman. I do have a question from Councillor Zakidniak for you, if you'll stand by. Go ahead, Councillor Zakidniak.
Thank you. So you had mentioned in your presentation that increasing parking minimum requirements would hurt residents. You also mentioned increasing costs for renters and home buyers. I wonder if you could expand on that a bit further, please.
Yes, so it kind of goes to the other delegates' points that by creating more parking spots, you're taking away places where there could be apartments, where there could be businesses, things that actually value our community. And it makes it harder for residents who do live in those outer edges of the city to go and commute in. We're spending more money on gasoline if we are driving to go and come in. It makes our transit routes on buses even longer, even going by bike. It makes it harder in the wintertime because that's farther that you have to travel. In all those ways, it becomes more expensive, and also by kind of allowing more cars to go and be in our city, it means that we have to spend more money on maintaining these roads to go and support these cars. So it's really something that's not adding value to our city. It's something that's just taking away, and that's why we don't want to see an increased amount of parking minimums, especially since so many other cities that does have an energy and sustainability framework or the equivalent of it are eliminating parking minimums, not increasing them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Skiniak. I don't see any further questions for you this afternoon. I'll thank you again very much for presenting today and ask that you please leave the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call upon delegation Jamie McDougall. I'll ask that you please state your name for the record, the organization you're representing, and where you reside. You'll have 5 minutes to address council, after which time they may have some questions for you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie McDougall. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Deborah Companies. I currently reside in Mill Bay, British Columbia, former resident of Regina, Saskatchewan, and the Greens on Gardner. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council, for providing me this opportunity to speak. I've been 10 years with Deborah, entering the company in the rental housing industry when there was a stated vacancy crisis in the city of Regina. Deborah is proud to be headquartered in Regina. We're also proud how we all but single-handedly curbed the vacancy crisis of 2010, introducing some of Regina's largest scale rental housing developments in decades. We've grown from these early days in a few hundred units to now exceed 4,000 units across the Prairie provinces. We believe our growth, our industry knowledge, and our experience both in Regina and other jurisdictions well informs the discussion at hand. I'd also like to thank City Administration. The parking study report they compiled and shared was very well researched and presented. And while the data was not significantly referenced in the June 21st Council meeting, we believe it did demonstrate the current parking ratios for those sites studied is more than sufficient and, if not, at times excessive. They also presented other information around parking infractions, parking ratios, etc., of other Canadian municipalities, and it's our view that this information too doesn't support reverting to a 1.5 times parking ratio. In fact, City Administration study, along with the experience that I've stated before of our group of companies and Deborah, shows a trend towards municipalities lessening ratios, not increasing them. I'm here today to, in essence, state 2 points. First, I would like to address the information or data referenced on the June 21st Council meeting as it related to one of our developments, Sterling Manor in the Greens on Gardner. Unfortunately, this information was misstated and represented coming from a newer and junior staff member through a telephone call from one of the councillors. Well, it stated that the owners were talked to, neither myself or any other senior staff member known to council or administration was approached for this data. Had we been, we would have been able to provide more qualified and accurate information, as I did in my brief, demonstrating that we have sufficient and unused stalls on site. Second, of course, we're here to lend our support to the 1.0 times parking ratio bylaw that's currently in place. Why do we feel this way and why do we lend support to that bylaw? We tend to trust the experts, in this case, City Administration. We're of the opinion that we should support and rely upon the urban design and city planning professionals, those that are trained in urban design and planning, attend conferences, gather data, and keep informed of industry trends. We also feel this way because we think that the current or proposed parking bylaw amendment will not address any currently stated concerns. If, as it has been stated by some council, that there are parking concerns on or around current multifamily sites in the city, modifying the bylaw will not change this. Instead, what can change for the better and for the future is more progressive urban design concepts, more robust public transit, and honoring the OCP and sustainability objectives set forth by council. A bylaw that provides for more parking, provides for more vehicles, and is counter to each of those goals. We also feel this way because policy affects practice. We've learned a lot by building in other jurisdictions with lesser parking ratios, including developments in the suburbs of Edmonton and Calgary, where we're experiencing near 100% occupancy with ratios hovering around 1.0 to 1.2 times ratio. We believe that if you build it, they will come, cars that is. If you don't build it, in this case parking stalls, people will find other solutions, including ride sharing, public transit, and active transit options. A change in policy or parking ratio back to 1.5 could once again cause this vacancy crisis of 2010 in the city of Regina and would not be supportive of developers and multifamily development, thus driving development capital to go elsewhere to other jurisdictions, to other municipalities. And when this housing development goes elsewhere, so too do residents. As an example, in case in point, we are actively considering the purchase of another multifamily parcel of land in Regina. A ratio of 1.5 times would significantly challenge the feasibility of this opportunity and may cause us to deploy our capital elsewhere to jurisdictions that have supportive policy in this matter as it relates to parking. As stated also in my brief, and I won't go into it in detail, we also feel this way because this policy would be counter to greater societal trends and housing issues, namely that of affordability and access to housing. If multifamily development slow, the shift in the supply-demand curve will most likely impact pricing, and or if, as suggested in the last council meeting, developers are expected to build expensive underground parkades, these costs too will be passed on ultimately to residents, as the multifamily industry is not immune to significant inflationary and operating cost pressures in other industries. As far as access to housing, with the well-documented growth of the province and the record levels of immigration across Canada, we feel that all levels of government, including the City of Regina, should be looking for policy that supports new housing and other housing solutions. And as it relates to immigration, it's an important footnote that many of our residents who are new to Canada, who might aspire to own a vehicle, oftentimes do not while they're renting. Furthermore, we're also seeing young people, as I believe our previous delegation is young, and I applaud them for attending the council meeting. We are also seeing younger people trending away from car ownership due to the expense, the burden of owning, and access to other solutions, namely public transit and ride share. We have far more information in my brief, and I trust that it was referenced. I'd like to thank both the Mayor and Council for your time and consideration as it relates to this matter.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. I was just about to cut you off, so that was a perfect closing on that one. I do have some questions from Council for you, sir. Councillor Bresciani, please proceed. Oh, sorry, apologies. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDougall, for being here.
Yes.
I do want to ask, you've indicated here, and I was the one that did call and spoke to you said junior employee. She was very knowledgeable, so I didn't see her as a junior, but she was excellent. And you've indicated here, and it's similar to what she said as well, that you have a 2% vacancy rate, which would be about 7 units if you're looking at the 320 suites. And she indicated, I used the word 7, and that would be, again, 7 parking stalls, so she was looking at 1 probably stall per door. So that was her response. But it was still very close, which would come out to about 10 stalls. So my questions to you is, if you have all the street parking, which is 24 on street, and you've got, I think, primary there, or a secondary stalls of 26, wouldn't you be close to that 1.5 then, if you were not able to access the street parking through the chair?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Bresciani. Well, a couple things. That's a multi-layered question or comment. Maybe I'll address the first point around our staff. In fact, I watched and I listened to the June 21st council meeting, and I believe in there it was you had also made a statement around 40 or 50 units. And I even, in fact, was a bit confused. 40 and 50 units, 7 units. I didn't know if we were referring to parking units or stalls, or if we were referring to units themselves. But as you were quoted in the June 21st meeting, you did reference 40 to 50 units available at any given time. Well, most certainly we don't have 40 to 50 apartment units at any time. We might have stalls available on transition and so forth. So that's how I referenced the fact that we have more than sufficient on-site parking. As far as the knowledge, and one thing I did want to make clear is, of course, I have talked to administration before. I have talked to councillors, including yourself, before, and I do believe we are accessible. We have access, and following the June 21st meeting, I did reach out to no response. So I do think we are accessible, and we would have been able to provide that information, as we did to city administration, several months ago when they sought us out because of our interest and involvement in multifamily housing in the city of Regina. So I'd like to think that the owners, quote unquote, as it was quoted on June 21st, could have been easily accessed, be it myself or my business partner and CEO, Dennis Jones. I do think we could have been found to provide better and more qualified information. Our staff is also wary of secret shopping, of mystery shopping. And, at first she thought the call was from a resident, then she thought the call was from a prospective resident, then she thought the call was maybe and potentially a secret shopper. We all do it in the industry. So I do think there's some confusion around that data and the information, and I don't know that should be, taken as verbatim. I think there were other opportunities and access to find that information, and we shared it. We're happy to share it with anybody on administration or in council so that it's factual and so forth. Relative to the parking ratios that you referenced, when you look at the number of available on-site stalls, on-site stalls, parking stalls, and on-street stalls, I believe as administration found in their study across the two Greens on Gardner neighborhoods, they found an average of 25% on-street available and an average of 45% on-site available during the highest peak periods. And the same is true. And as per my brief, I did state, we did a study many years ago because we were trying to figure out where people like to park on our lots. And as any rental housing developer would do, we call it amenity pricing in the neighborhood. We were convinced that our developments that face out to green space and have unencumbered views and so forth, that residents would want to face that direction and maybe not necessarily to the parking lot. We were stumped by the data. We tracked the data for a long period of time, only to find out that many people wanted line of sight to their vehicle, particularly during the wintertime, for remote start purposes. So there are some people that would park on an adjacent street to a multifamily site, perhaps because they have to pay a modest fee for a secondary stall, but there's an equal, if not greater, number of people that would, parking stall assigned to them and paid for or not, during winter months, may want to see line of sight to their vehicle to ensure that it starts with remote start in the winter. So I don't think, as I stated also in my brief, I don't think we should preclude multifamily for residents from having access and availability to on-street parking, just the same as we wouldn't for single-family homeowners.
Okay, so my question, Mr. McDougall, is if you tally up the numbers and you took off the 25 or 24 that are on street, which in the report that administration brought back said that street is full all the time, the capacity, there's not vacancy on that street because there's only one street adjacent to on Green Falls. So my question though, it works out in the numbers that it would be close to the 1.5 that is required if the 25 cars on, or 24 actually cars on Green Falls had to park within the development, is my point through the chair. Is that accurate?
As I said in my brief, there's approximately 24 on street parking stalls. I think that represents a 0.0 or a 7.5% across the 320 units. We have an additional, we had 26 vacant secondary stalls, so those two offset one another perhaps. Then on top of that, we have another 20 vacant, as we call them, primary stalls. So I actually think that it still falls 7.5 to 10% off the 1.5, if you will. I also think it's worth noting that there's a pretty significant commercial development to the north of Green Falls Drive, and another significant commercial development to the west of Chuka. In some instances, that's closer staff parking for some of those people. And I do know that some business owners, retail owners, obviously ask their staff to park in less desirable stalls, of which some of those may be street parking. So I don't think we can, necessarily speculate, on the numbers or who's parking there. But between the two, numbers are sufficient. And in fact, by our calculations, our site that site could easily work off a 1.25 to 1.3 parking ratio.
Would you see that this is success when pretty in alignment with if you have the only 20 primary stalls left in a total of 480 stalls. Would you not see that as pretty close to your calculations through the chair? Because that's what it comes out to. That's pretty good. Would you agree?
Plus then the 26 secondary stalls, right? So there's actually at the time of our, following, and end of month, I might add, during full occupancy, or in the third week of the month, we pulled this data, there are actually 46 stalls available. Not just 20, there are 46 stalls available on site.
Through the chair, I understand that, but if the 26 were not parking on the street, is my point. So if you looked at that, that would be very close to what your margin was at the kind of the 1.5. It would work out through the chair.
Perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps, but I think that's speculative, and I don't know that I can fully speak to how ratios are determined, and if they, if city planners, urban design professionals discount or don't include any provision for street parking. Again, as I said in my brief, if we're representing the interests of all citizens of Regina and constituents in Regina, then I think the needs and rights of renters should not be different from those that own single-family homes.
Thank you.
And so I think the point on street parking is moot.
Thank you. Well, absolutely. I would agree that we shouldn't treat anyone differently, but I also agree, where do your visitors park through the chair?
We have designated visitor stalls that they can access, and I believe perhaps just like renters, sometimes visitors may also park on the street if they're looking for line of sight to their vehicle.
I didn't see any visitors parking, but okay. The last question is in regards to parking management, and other cities have looked at, so there's not an overflow, an onslaught of parking, which we've seen in the Greens and Harbour Landing, where we hear from, or I hear from residents that cannot park because of developers not providing enough of parking, or the charge. But the question is that do you see that have you ever, in other cities, where cities have put in, charge for parking in front? So if it's a 2-hour or 4-hour or just signage, so therefore individuals would then have to park within the complex. Through the chair.
I'm sorry. If you're referring to parking management software or monitoring lots and so on and so forth, we do that across jurisdictions, and there are companies and there are technological solutions to that. In fact, that hasn't come up in this discussion, and I'm glad it has, because beyond some of the most straightforward and simple solutions of increasing public transit and supporting ride sharing and other active transport solutions and so forth, we do employ parking management software, and we're able to use parking apps and parking management software to better utilize on-site stalls. We have not deployed that in the city of Regina at this point in time. We've used a third-party provider, and in fact, we're in the final stages of developing our own parking management software, which we will unveil later this year, and we intend to take across our entire portfolio. My point being that there are more sophisticated and forward-thinking solutions to managing parking.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. I do have some more councillors who have questions for you, sir. I will go to Councillor Zakidniak. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my two questions in one so that we can maybe just have one answer. So you had mentioned that developers may need to develop elsewhere, or may be inclined to develop elsewhere if this passes. And also you mentioned that it won't